With that, I'd like to introduce Laura Burkhalter, who will be our moderator today. Laura is a native of Des Moines and graduated from the University of Iowa in English and Art History. She's been with the Art Center since 1999, first as curatorial assistant, then as assistant curator, associate curator, and then curator in 2015. Laura has organized several wonderful shows that I'm sure you've all seen at the Art Center. And so we are just so thrilled that she was able to come and moderate today. So with that, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you for having me. 12 people is insane. we would never have this many, but it's really good because I know that I think I read through all of your artist statements and I looked at all of your work, and I decided to stick with sort of generalized topics of conversation because I don't want to target people, because sometimes the interesting answers come from somebody that I maybe would not expect, and I also know not every question or topic is a good for everybody, and everyone's comfort level with public speaking is different. I, working at the Art Center, is a trial by fire of public speaking, so I had to learn to do it and learn to like it, but I know it's not easy for everybody. So don't, I'm gonna, like I said, I've got some general topics to throw out. Hopefully it generates conversation amongst each other. I've definitely learned from doing panels that sometimes the questions you guys ask each other are way better than anything I'm going to come up with. So if some topic is really interesting and you feel like the dialogue's going, or you've got a burning question for one of your colleagues up here, let's keep that going. So thank you all for participating and for your work. It's really great. I'm really happy to do this. I think it is really any besides the art that we all want to see here in Des Moines and the exhibitions we want to go to, we all want to meet each other and talk, and it can feel like there's not enough opportunities to do that, and so thank you very much for doing this. So the first topic or question I want to throw out is actually one that we use. I learned it from our museum education department as a question that they ask the fourth graders, but it's actually a really useful question.
Entirely
when you're trying to introduce difficult contemporary art to fourth graders, but I love this question because it leads, I think it covers any kind of art, and the question is, where is the art? As I was reading through all of your artist statements, one of the things that really struck me was that while you are all photographers, you guys have a lot of work that you do both before and after you take that picture. And I think that in a lot of ways is who you are as artists. And if you want to call that conceptual art or call yourself a conceptual photographer, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too. But I would like some of you to talk about what you do to get to that point that I think sort of defines your practice as an artist, or what you do after you take the picture that defines that final art object that you make. Who wants to start?
Well, okay, since I kind of made my shopping list of people, I can tell you that what I was looking for individually was somebody that did have something to say, because that's what I do. I have something to say, and for it to get through superficial layers that we normally encounter in a conversation, I do it visually with little objects and things. So all of these people, when I had my shopping list of what I wanted, that had to be first, a practice of storytelling. Because to me, whether it's painting or photography and anything other, if somebody can paint technically as a painter, somebody who has something to say is an artist. And to me, it's the same thing with the camera. You're a photographer, or if you have something to say and you try to communicate that, then you become an artist. So that's, I mean, it is important, actually, the conceptualizing and the storytelling. So for me, things I read, things I see, things that catch my interest, it doesn't always work to communicate that verbally because of those superficial barriers. So then by turning that into a story with props and objects and players in a drama, then I can maybe do that for the people that take the time to look.
I think just on a practical level, there is a lot of prep work in both of ours because we do sort of symbolic objects. So for me, I know it's a treasure hunt of finding props and flowers that are saying what I want them to say. Doing a lot of going down the rabbit hole of research. So there's the prep work beforehand, and then the taking the picture, and then afterwards, after I have a group of pictures, sometimes then it gels to me what subconsciously is being said, as well as what I was trying to say on the surface. I'll see some similarities of, oh gosh, I really was thinking about my father's death when I was taking these pictures.
So I'll put you on the spot just because I know a little bit more about your practice. So when you're staging your photograph, are you already making the art then, or do you consider it to be not the art until you've taken the photo?
The staging is kind of the starting place, and then as I'm going and seeing it through the camera, then I play with it and move it around. I don't have it pre-conceptualized perfectly in my head and then do it, but as I take the picture, it sort of comes together, and then through editing too, I think we make a lot of choices of which one is the one that feels right.
Can you both point out your work just for anybody that doesn't know? Yeah.
By the window. The first three by the window.
And Molly.
Molly Wood, and I'm the two in the front, the one over your desk, and then the poppies in the back room.
Thank you.
I'd like to say,
And what's your name, sir?
David Richmond.
Okay.
My art is unframed, and it's on individual white pieces of rice paper along the wall back there. I'd like to say that yes, communication, art is communication. An artist's statement would be a piece of work. Whether or not that artist knows exactly what that statement is as that artist is making it, it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Sometimes things come out and then you figure it out later. But art is a statement. Art is a communication. And I'd like to say it's the first written communication. I'd like to say that.
So my name's Chris Rayburn, and my pieces are in the back. They're two big pictures of trees. And my process is also very, a lot of work happens, would have been in the darkroom in the old days, it's now in Photoshop. So when I take the pictures, it's many pictures that all come together to make one, but I don't hope people see the process. In the end, I hope the process disappears, and what's left is a picture that is about whatever idea it is that I'm trying to put forward.
That's sort of similar for me. I'm John Sheets, and my work is the Palladium work behind the counter there. And I don't generally pre-visualize when I'm working. I go into the field and I shoot what moves me. But doing assemblages, whether it's a triptych or the hexaptych that I did of the eclipse, those obviously require more planning, and anything that's using a view camera requires a fair bit of planning. But I mean, the eclipse was a ridiculous amount of planning. But normally it's not like that. But I tend to shoot what I see and what moves me, and then I leave it to the viewer to see if it moves them or not, and then try not to impose too much narrative on it, because I don't want to sort of tell people how to feel about the work. And sometimes they respond, and sometimes, more often than not, they don't. But that's okay.
I think it's really interesting how some artists have, this idea in mind, and they do a lot of research and, pre-plan and pre-visualize and all of that, and just sort of execute it. And then I feel like I'm sort of the opposite in a way, because I sort of photograph first and then ask questions later of myself, and then sort of see how things are fitting together, and decide from there what it's about and what I want it to be about, and if I need to shoot more or seek out certain texts and ask the advice of other artists or whomever I think would have good input, and kind of go from there. So I feel like that whole process is where the art lives for me.
It's a process.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I with my process, like with making these images, and my name's Anik Shobakin. I sort of figured it out along the way as well. So I agree with you, Elise. Like you start making the images and then you look at the images, and once you start editing, I think that's where the artwork lies, is the edit. And I think that for me, it was very important to, like, writing letters to all of the Lost-Storm homeowners and putting myself in this vulnerable space where I'm a woman going to a stranger's house by myself, putting myself in this vulnerable spot, but they're also putting themselves in a vulnerable spot by allowing me to make their portrait. So I felt like we kind of met halfway.
It's a really interesting question because a lot of what has been said it makes sense to me, but the idea of art and what that is, and like, is it a product? And a lot of what we're talking about is process, so that's what I was thinking about. And this is myself over here and Christine. That's what you were just saying, what we were talking about earlier today, is how this operates. It's like the images are just a really, really, really tiny part of what I'm doing anyway with this particular project. A lot of it is about exploration and the idea of the perfect moment and the perfect instance, and kind of having that all snap into place, and then the excitement of that happening when it's accumulating so much information in terms of images, but also in information of researching the topic as I go along, and then trying to figure out what to make of it. So a lot of what I do as well is to kind of work intuitively, and then it comes after. And then what happens is, for everything I do, basically, not just this project, it's about how do I communicate with the image what I felt when I was there. And I'm not doing, I don't really do a whole lot of manipulation in the images, but I want to make sure that the contrast and the color and the way that the print actually kind of communicates and sings communicates what I was doing, what I was thinking at the time. And so sometimes that's how I edit things in and out. That's how I edit things in and out if I'm not able to get that point with the actual print. So when it comes to the physical image, I'm thinking about that as well, and that's how I make my choices.
And so my name's Tim Olson. I did the portraits here. So the projects I've done, or the photography I've done, are usually documentary types of projects that take a long time to organize. So I feel like where it really starts to come together, the part that's most satisfying is editing, and putting. In this case, I did a book, so putting that together, I think, is where it starts.
Question for John. If you were talking about you're trying to get an idea out and the viewer reads it, something of that effect. If the viewer reads something different than what you were trying to say, is that okay with you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't want to dictate. I mean, because I shoot what I feel, and so I don't want to tell somebody else how they should feel, and so I try to just create things that fill my heart, and sometimes it really resonates with people, and that's great. But I don't know if it's how it's filling their heart. That's for them.
Thank you all. So some of you have actually kind of touched on this in your answer, but sort of my next question kind of leads in is that obviously in contemporary art and photography is no different. We have permission to take a photograph of probably almost anything you want. Supplies can be anything. We don't have these sort of strict rules about still life portraiture, although some of you do still sort of work in traditional genres of photography. And I think what I was really interested in when I was reading your statements and looking at the images is, I mean, you guys are covering such a wide range of very different things, and yet a lot of your sort of statements about your feelings about your subject or your process with someone was somewhat similar. So because so many of you have really specific homework assignments and research that you give yourself to find your subject. I mean, some of you maybe don't and are more free form, but if you wouldn't mind talking about how you got to your chosen subject, or even just, since obviously you probably make a lot of art, the subject matter of the body of work that you have on view here. Maybe if anybody's is really specific, if you want to talk about that, and again, if somebody is really general or maybe found it by accident, that would be an interesting response as well.
I'll start. I moved to Iowa 4 years ago and I lived in Virginia, so my work has quite often been a lot about the sky, the atmosphere, and light, how that affects the work. And so a lot of it's been about the emotional impact of the work based on those things. But I lived in cities for a long period of time, so I was looking at buildings and concrete. When I was living in a rural place, I was looking at the mountains, and I was looking at how the humans existed in the landscape. So what paths they formed or what structures they created, and then I would photograph with all those sorts of things in the composition. So when I moved here, and the land is flatter, and so I started looking a lot more. I'm looking out, but I'm looking up at the sky. So my interest in clouds and light, sky, and atmosphere, and then my concern about the human impact on the world around us all came together into this particular project.
Anybody else? You want to go?
My process is, there's a real process there. I mean, I'm very rural based, so, and I'm kind of influenced by past rural based art. So for me, I'm very interested in the stuff that's really almost banal that we just kind of don't care about, we don't look at, but it repeats itself all the time where we live, and if you can look at it and remove it from that and just concentrate on it, you can see maybe things that are beautiful, or maybe make you think about things that you wouldn't think about otherwise. So I do have a real strict process, but I don't know that always shows up when you're standing in front of the picture. I don't, that is up to whoever's looking at it.
And does that sort of focus on those things repeat regardless of what your subject matter? So you have the trees in sort of suburban areas. Do you have other bodies of work that are related thematically?
I'm working on another body right now that's the corners of my bedroom. And then before that it was a series of the fronts of houses and how neighbors kind of repeated, and then how those houses developed over time. But all kind of real close to where I live. I mean, I love a lot of different ways to look at things, but for me, I'm just kind of trying to just, and it might take me 10 years to finish something. I work real slow. Real slow. Frustrating.
As far as subject matter, mine, I've only just now realized how constant it's been, and it was because somebody asked me a question of why did you start photographing botanicals, and I realized that my grandfather taught me how to take pictures, and we did it walking around his farm in Louisiana, and I was about that tall, and so everything I'm looking at is trees and branches and flowers, and he always had stories of events that happened in that live oak tree and that kind of thing, and it feels like there's that connection of him and photography and botanicals are just kind of wed for me, and so I've kind of stuck with that subject matter through a lot of different phases of my life.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, sorry.
No.
My process is, my subject matter might change, but my process is always the same throughout all of my bodies of work, and that I always use the same camera, and it's really important to me to, I shoot medium format film, and it makes me work really hard because I don't know what I'm getting, and it really slows me down as well, and it's always handheld, and I feel like the main thread between all my bodies of work is that I'm just curious about people, and I want to interact with those around me and get to know them better. So,
Do you think, or how's your, do you think the people you shoot, obviously you're really, it's not quite portraiture, but you're going into someone's home,
yes.
you're asking for some sort of,
Yes.
even if it's quick, it's a relationship for that
Yes.
brief period of time.
Yes.
Do you consider them to be collaborators in your
Yes,
work?
absolutely, 100%. And that was really interesting because writing them a letter, like we had it stated, like I wrote them a letter, they got the letter, and then we communicate from there through email. And so it's like they knew that I was coming, let's say on Sunday at 3 p.m. So they knew they were going to have their photo made. So it's like, what do they wear? What books do they have on their shelves? Like what flowers do they have on their table? Like they were aware of this photo that was going to be made. So I do feel like we were collaborating in a sense, even though it wasn't spoken, that we were collaborating, making this photo together. And that was really exciting.
Okay. Yeah. The work that I have here is a return to something I was doing in 1985, and I put halftone screen for printing negatives into an enlarger and made images out of that. And people asked me then, is that computer generated, which means digital today. And it wasn't, it was purely analog, really. Now, of course, I went other directions, started shooting with color, film, whatever, always a little black and white. And now with digital, I'm actually doing digital work, but it's imagery that I developed back in 1985, a method I developed. And that's just this body work. I came back to it accidentally, pretty much found it accidentally. But now I'm pursuing it again.
I started, I've been doing photography for most of my life, but I started getting serious about a decade ago. And at that time, digital was, really at the point where it became something you could do, fine art, digital photography. And I was focused on that. I hadn't shot film in a long time. And then for various reasons, I started doing more and more film. And I've been in the digital space, I've been doing a lot of panoramas, stitched panoramas. But there was something I didn't like about taking the world in an arc and then flattening it. It didn't feel like the right story that I wanted to tell. And I ended up actually having my view camera custom made so that I could do these types of assemblages, all with just rear shift. For those of you who know view-fit cameras, it's unusual to do that with that wide. And so that gave me an opportunity to tell the stories I wanted to tell, but then also tell new stories that I couldn't tell otherwise. And so it's kind of funny. I'm talking about telling stories while earlier I talked about feelings, but they're kind of, for me, they're intermingled. But they're the stories in my head. You guys can have your own stories too. But I found that through process, I was able to expand my work rather than having the process confine the work. All that said, the camera I use the most is the camera that's in my pocket. It's my phone, and I use that every day, all the time. And some of those end up as palladium prints as well.
They have good lenses.
They do have good lenses, yeah. And so I cover both gamuts. I'm not trying to be purist and say it has to be film or it's not. And there's a digital process as part of an intermediate step to get to my palladium prints as well. Sometimes.
Oh yeah.
So kind of like
I start with the film, and then it gets scanned in, and then it gets printed on an Epson printer. So it's like this interaction between technology and traditional processes. Yeah.
I just wanted to make an observation. You're saying how you're very curious about your subjects and you want to get to know your subjects. And as we're sitting here talking, I'm watching you, and as each of us talks, you actually are interacting with every single person that speaks. Because you look so intently, and you're actually responding to what they're saying. So that's yeah. So that's completely. You hit that. That's exactly right.
Yeah. I'm the daughter of a shrink. So
Oh. Turn the microphone off.
I think I inherited it from my dad.
Well, I mean, only of all of you, only about 2 of you have work that is very that involves other humans, at least directly in your process, and the rest of you seem to they're conspicuously absent. So, I mean, I do think there's a big difference between people who. This isn't a judgment, but there's, you're controlling your subject matter in a certain way, unless you're going out into the world, which obviously, if you're, in a place that's a little bit more, accidents can happen if you're going out in nature and things like that. But a lot of you do have controlled environments. And in the photographers that I've worked with in the past, the people who do human subjects are often quite different than the people that don't. And there is a certain vulnerability to welcoming someone else into the practice because you don't know what their reaction's going to be to your very personal final product. How do you and your portraits as well, is how they think when they see that finished product is what they think of. It's one thing when you're talking to them when you're shooting the picture, but how do you talk to them about your artwork? Do they still feel involved in that, or do they have judgments about that?
Right. With this project specifically, I think a few of the people knew more what they were getting into than others, but I think and I worry that some, with some of the final pictures, like this one with the guy at the Eagles Club, he would think I was, making fun of him or something, because it is kind of an American Gothic type picture in the end. But they were all happy with it, I think. But it was more, they were happy to tell their story, so it may just be the interview part of it. But they were hard photographs to do, just because I was using a view camera, a 8x10 view camera, and so it was an old one, so that with the lens they had to hold still for usually about 3 seconds. So it kind of forced people into a certain kind of photograph that wasn't completely natural. But for me, like I was saying before, it's hard taking the photographs. That's really the hardest part for me, but the editing afterwards is what I look forward to. But I mean, just arranging things and setting it up. So I'm not probably as good with people as you are, I think.
But do you both show those photos, like say to the people that are in your photographs?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Do you give them the opportunity to veto?
No. I sort of say, and I don't know, like I just basically say, like, these probably aren't photos that you're going to want to put on Instagram or on your wall.
Right.
Like these, this is the way I see you at this point, at this specific day, at this specific time, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think they get it. Like, I think they understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did give, I started out giving them a veto, and then I stopped because I had a couple people. But it's funny, some with personality, some people who you think would be more fussy about that aren't. But I would give, so I gave everybody a photograph, and they seemed happy with it. Some of them, but then there were other people who didn't like it at all.
Do they sign releases? I'm sorry. Do they sign releases?
I did, on this project I did, but I don't know if there was one person who really didn't like it, so I didn't use it. But so if somebody really doesn't like it, I'm not going to use it. It was hard to get people to hard enough just to get them to trust me enough to come in for the so.
I think it's really interesting that you say that there's a difference between photographers who do portraiture versus kind of everything else, because when I tell people that I'm a photographer, they say, "Oh, what do you photograph?" And I say, "Things that don't talk back." I like to control the situation as best I can, so there is a difference between us.
I definitely, as a non-portrait photographer, I admire portrait photographers, especially those who seek out subjects that they don't know. Like, I'm fine taking pictures of people I know because I have a relationship with them, but it might surprise you, but I'm actually kind of shy, and particularly meeting people that I have no reason to talk to. So that's really, really hard for me, and so being able to do that is really very, very brave.
I'm painfully shy. I don't know about
That's
you.
so interesting
because Molly knows me. Like, I am painfully shy.
Well, I'm very introverted too.
Yeah.
I it's painful to take pictures of people I don't know,
Yeah.
it's not enjoyable to me because it's just too. And so the idea that you seek out something that makes you nervous is interesting.
Yeah, I think it's like a challenge, you know.
Yeah.
And like I don't know if you feel that way, but I don't know how shy you are in day-to-day life, but
You might want to ask your father about it.
I feel like when I have the camera, I'm not shy. It's like, do you feel
There's
that
a
way
barrier.
when you're taking portraits?
No, I mean, I think I am shy, but I also have a pretty thick skin as far as just making cold calls. And a lot of people are going to say no. And
Sure.
well, I think at one time in my life that would have bothered me. But yeah, well, I think you're right. Once you get it set up and
Yeah.
you're with the camera, then
Yeah.
Molly, I use the camera as a security blanket when I'm in a place where I have to have social interaction with people. If I can use that. So for instance, my wife had a high school reunion recently. She went to an all-girls school, and there were going to be only other husbands there. So I was like, oh my God, if I bring my camera.
Yeah.
So I brought a digital camera, and I ended up being the event
Yeah.
photographer. So
I've done
that
that.
was awesome.
I've done that so many times
So for those of you who maybe don't photograph people necessarily, but who kind of go out in the world and, you know, whether that's in a rural area or if you're in the suburbs, how do people approach you? Do people wonder what you're doing? How do you handle people, like, you're in sort of the everyday accidents of just being out in public and trying to make art?
I get a lot of interesting looks with my
Taxidermy animals.
with my either my two-wheel bag lady cart or my collapsible wagon with dead animals.
Imagine they leave you alone though. They give you suggestions. Yeah.
Well, actually, many years ago, I trample around with a tripod and a camera and just kind of go wherever I wanted, and not worry. Today, you can't do that because people are very suspicious of cameras, and so I did one recently on a college campus. So I decided, okay, call security, make sure that they understand that I'm not I'm standing there along their little pond with a dead squirrel and some oranges and a camera. Don't call but that I think I ended up being safety conscious because back when I was in college, I was experimenting with a pinhole camera, and it was a trash can, big cardboard trash can. I was using 16 by 20 inch paper for the film, and I didn't have a car, so I would load it up in the art building, walk over in front of the old Capitol in Iowa City, sit it down and sit in front of it, and then get up and walk away. And after about the fourth trip, the test, I was sitting there and I heard these footsteps coming up behind me, and this very soothing voice said, "Hey, are you having a good day?" And I turned around, it was campus security. Somebody from one of the classrooms that saw me thought, okay, there's a nutcase down there. Somebody better get him. So I've kind of learned to be a little bit more leery and not just assume it's like it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I check on things, but it's because, I got weird stuff with me.
Can I speak to that, Brother Randy?
Yes, go right ahead.
I teach photography, and I'm teaching, of course, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And there is a consciousness that wasn't around. I grew up in the 70s, right? And I've had students, more than one. I had this student, they went to Memphis and took pictures of Beale Street, and they were wonderful. She goes, everybody was judging me. I said, what are you talking about? Well, I had a camera, and they're judging me. So in the 70s, you wanted the attention, It didn't matter. And I heard it from other students, too. They're afraid to go out with a camera.
Well, in similar situations to what I used to, driving down a country road and just pull over and set up my tripod, I've actually been confronted by farmers.
Oh, yeah.
What are you taking a picture of?
Sure.
What are you doing? And I'm not sure what, maybe they've got a meth lab or something in their barn that I don't know about, but I offer to show them what I've done, and I've never experienced that before.
Yeah.
So there is something spooky.
I've been stopped many times. And to the point where when I was
guilty.
I did talk myself out, and the lady said, "Well, you look like a nice boy." But then this was when I was taking the pictures of the houses, and you're standing in front of somebody's house on the sidewalk, you can do it, but, so I thought, maybe I should check into this, and I went and I talked to the police department, and they did a background check, and they gave me a letter. So for a long time, I had a letter in my camera bag, and it said, this guy's okay. People are suspicious, and even to this day, when I go take pictures, if I'm in parking lots, I feel like I'm stealing something, and I'm like ready for somebody to come talk to me, and it's like, not that I'm really happy to talk to people, but it changes your flow, it changes your focus, you're trying to slow down, and you're fighting that tension to want to speed up.
I want to say one thing, I don't want to, I was taking pictures of all the courthouses in Iowa. And in Davenport, the state trooper came out and wanted to see my ID. I gave it to him. And he says he's taking pictures of courthouses, and I don't want to say anything else.
I think it's interesting, and I hear this from artists of other disciplines, whether it's people sketching. But I think for photographers, it's extra interesting because one of the other things I sort of wanted to ask you all about is I think we're all of the age to admit that we remember when nobody had a camera, and now every one of us probably has a camera on them right now, and that there was a point like that happened very fast. And I mean, I have times of my life where there are no photos and then instantly photos of everything from that moment forward. And so you would think by that rationale that people would be more comfortable with photography, but obviously you've all had some sort of experience where that's not the case. And I know, like I said, I've had people be stopped for sketching somewhere, being in public sketching somewhere. And I would guess the two things are maybe related, but do you feel, sort of on the flip side, do you feel that because everyone has a camera and people sort of probably take more pictures than they did, that affects the way that people look at your work or talk to you about your work, or feel like maybe they know more, like people feeling maybe like they know more about photography than maybe they actually do because we are more used to snapping pictures all the time, which is nothing like what you all do, but do people assume, make assumptions?
I think there's far too much photography, actually, but by a huge amount. And the comment that I hear from people a lot is, well, computers and digital, it's all become so easy. But I can sit down for a half an hour and show you 200 or 300 examples on the internet that prove that it's not easy. It's just become easier to share it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted Susan to do this, is because photography has devalued itself, and I wanted. Well, okay, when you started here, you were working with photography based on 100+ year history of the medium, and so there had been very established levels of quality. And then digital came along and blew that all to pieces. And it happened for you, and unless you have another 100 hours of time during the week to go re-educate yourself about what's out there now, it's, so I thought a little nudge. And then also for the people that come into a gallery, to maybe help them realize that there's still really good stuff happening and it's worth what they say it's worth. And just to kind of raise the bar a little bit, because there is too many photographs being taken, and it's created somewhat of a problem. But now also, I'm not some sort of crazy elitist Nazi. I think everybody in the world should have the opportunity to be creative at the same time.
I would disagree that there's too many pictures being taken, but
Yeah, but you always disagree with me.
That's the reason why they're so.
Tell them
If I moderate a panel and there's a really good fight, I'm going to eat out on that.
the problem is there's less ability to discern what's good and bad.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, you know the old adage, buy a piano, own a piano, buy a camera, you're a photographer. Right? So, you know, I think that is part of the problem, but you know, that's an advantage and a disadvantage actually of shooting view camera, because when you shoot a view camera, people don't think you're spying, because who would be stupid enough to spy with a view camera? They may not know what you're doing exactly, but then of course they want to know, and then they want to see.
Oh, there's
They
long
want to see the
irritating
ground glass
conversation.
and all that. So that really throws you off. But
The portrait photography.
but I do think that we're sort of in the golden age and the ultimate demise of photography at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, and so
It's a
there's a lot of
tipping
great work being done. A lot of the work that's up here probably wouldn't be possible, at least not really feasible without digital. There's a lot of really atrocious work being done that, you know, it's like, somebody please take their saturation slider away from me.
Young people really like to juice that stuff.
So you think that actually, you mentioned the ultimate demise, you really feel that?
I'm being a little extreme, but
Okay.
I was looking for the right words. But I mean, I think that we're both seeing it's a heyday, but also it has its negative
Well,
side
yeah.
too. And my fear is that the things that don't comport to my aesthetic, because obviously we know that's what counts, will somehow win out, and so yeah.
And there is a certain democracy that digital
Yeah,
allow both in.
Exactly.
But they said
Video.
the same thing with film in smaller formats
Yeah.
too.
You know what?
Yeah,
The
precisely.
first time I judged a film, we had a film and video competition, and it was sort of past the point where everybody had a video camera on them. And I'm like, if you ever want to proof that directing is an art, do an open call. So, and I think photography is, by everyone having it, in some ways it does allow you to see the people who really do know how to wield it, but you have to get through a lot to do that. You guys are now learning what painters learned with my 5-year-old could do that. Now everyone thinks they can do. But it obviously shows like this, I think, it does make photography exhibitions and photography curation, I think, more important to take the time to understand what the camera can do, what the human work that goes into, whether it's a research project before or what you're doing in your process or finishing. I mean, just the finishing. I mean, walking through here, you guys all have very radically different presentation ideas. I think a lot of, again, people think you're a photographer, the photograph is the thing, but very clearly you all have very strong opinions on scale, framing, just that sort of thing. Are those, again, part of your conception, or is that something you guys have sort of come to as your careers have gone along, how you like your presentation?
I think for me, if I'm going to say that this is worth this amount of money, I guess to me it has to look like it is, the first thing. But also, if it can also blend with the idea and the concept, then so much the better.
Yeah, your frames are really integral too.
I have a fear that they're too important. But that's just me.
I mean, I can see that scale is something a lot of you think about very strongly. Does anyone want to talk about scale and how you decide? Along with cameras being democratized, printing is easier now too, so you probably have a lot more freedom to make your image what size. So how do you sort of deliberately decide what size you're going to print at?
I had a scale dilemma. When I first started doing these kind of Dutch still life things, I wanted to make them really small and put them in big black frames, and people kept asking me, are you doing these small because you're timid or because you want them small? And I realized, oh my god, I am. Because when I look at a flower that's this big, I'm looking at it like this, but most people aren't, or everybody would be doing that. And I realized that I'm seeing this, but to have somebody else see that, it needs to be like, 3 feet wide, and so it was hard for me to print things so large because it feels more out there. It's like, here I am, but it was kind of liberating too. But I struggled to go big like that.
The scale's important, and to me scales, for my process, for these pictures, it started with the idea that they were going to be big, because I wanted them to be where you could be immersed in them that they, you know, with some things that are big will push you away, and sometimes you can get pulled in, and sometimes they'll pull you into a certain point, and then you have to stop because if you get too close, it's not an enjoyable experience. Your work does that too.
Well, thank you.
And so this specific, to work this big was important just on this series. I can't imagine working that big all the time. It's it's hard to work big. It's a commitment, it's a financial commitment. As an artist that, you know, and it's not just printing it and framing it, it's moving it, and if you don't sell it, storing it. You know,
Yeah, financial,
it's a commitment.
Well, yeah, that's good.
So all of you have some secret giant project you want to do?
We all want to share a big flat file somewhere.
We don't want to share one.
Actually, I'd like to see small. I like John's approach. I like small prints. I really love small prints. In fact, in the class that I teach, one of the assignments is small is the new big, and I actually give them templates for what used to be historical film formats. And I said, this is the size. Go bring me something incredible that's so interesting from across the room. It sucks people in, and they can enjoy the amazing resolution because you haven't made it big.
You know, I love that because I've thought about, you know, I shoot 5x7 because 5x7 contact print, 5x7 or larger if you do assemblages. But I've thought about, I was doing a lot of 617 work or 717 work and on medium format, so I can do 617 work on medium format, and it was, and I haven't really printed it because it's much smaller, but I've been thinking about getting small and even smaller. I've seen contact palladium print on 35 millimeter film that was just exquisite, when you live in San Francisco and you have a tiny house, which we do, that's an important consideration as well. Size matters. Small is better. And then my wife's a photographer, and she prints small, and she just does amazing things. So I think there's a lot to be explored. Like you say, if you can draw people in, then that's terrific.
And then they get to enjoy it twice,
Right.
from 8 feet away and then 8 inches away.
Right.
I'd like to throw something out. I've seen some of Cindy Sherman's early work, and it's 8x10. And now that she's big and famous, it's as big as the side of a barn. I don't know what that means. It has something to do with money, though.
I think scale is super important to think about when you're deciding how you want the viewer to interact with your work as well. You know, like David's work with the dot patterns, you know, that's best enjoyed from afar, because not only do you get the expanse of the imagery, but just standing up close gives you a headache with all of those dots.
You actually like that sort of thing.
Which, you know, if you're into that, cool. But with my work, which is behind Laura, I kind of was thinking more about the intimacy of having a singular experience with a book, really. So I kind of arrange them almost as vignettes of like book spreads, and that's a singular experience. So rather than being around a lot of people in the gallery space and kind of having to fight for that viewing experience, you're kind of forced to go up close and have it sort of to yourself. So it's just a different way of interacting with it.
So most of you do have works that are in sort of series in this exhibition, or you have several works. Tell the truth. Do you prefer that the viewer, if you're making the ideal viewer experience, do they see multiple image from that series, or is what you want to say there in each individual one?
I think it depends on the project, because sometimes things are best seen all together, so you can get more of the narrative if there is one there, whereas sometimes a single image speaks for itself.
I think it's two different experiences. I mean, if you could get an image that speaks to the whole idea of the series in one image, that's fantastic. But it's richer to see a lot of those images as well. So, but it's two different things.
Tim's work of the book, it's amazing when you open it up, and it's very different when you look at it from the
These
folding book.
the panorama, yeah. And these, the millwork portraits, probably, I think they really
That's a
need to be
different
seen. Yeah,
You're thinking of that as a
right.
as a narrative
group,
story.
but that the panorama. That's one of the difficulties. Is the only way to show it is in this long. That book is 66 feet long. The print was 150 feet long. So it's just. Yeah, but it doesn't work if you cut it up into sections.
You don't want to print it on 8x10?
Yeah, when it comes with a magnifying glass.
So generally I print mine, sort of at the original negative size. But with the eclipse, because the suns are so small, I ended up making that one larger so that the suns would be visible, because without the suns it's just a photo of a bridge and you wonder why the windows are there. But I think that I forgot what I was going to say, so I'll shut up. As photographers, we often think we have to work in a series, and then we have those outliers, that image you took that you really love, and you're like, but I don't know what to do with that. I mean, for me, the eclipse is that, right? I'm never going to redo that, and thank God. And so, but it doesn't have to be that it's part of a series. But then in the series, getting to your point, there's another way that you can capture a series, which is in a book, which is what Tim was saying. And so that, I think, is a way to kind of cover like both sides to it. There's work that really needs to be seen as a body, because that's how it makes sense. And it's right, the average person isn't going to be able to buy 20 prints or 100 prints, much less display them, even if they own them. But a book is where that can happen, and I like that concept a lot.
And I will say, as a curator, one of the things that's nice about the ease of digital images is if I'm doing research on an artist, even if they have an Instagram page, not even necessarily a big website, I don't necessarily have access to their artist statement, or maybe it's somebody I've never met, but being able to look through spend some time looking through not just maybe one body of work, but say maybe 20 or 30 photographs, to me really feel like I get a sense of who that artist is before I even reach out to them. Or maybe, again, it's somebody I meet at an event like this, and having that sort of ease of looking at a lot of artist images when maybe I saw one at someone's house or in a museum or in another gallery. I love the idea that you have the one, but the accessibility of the rest of that story that the artist told is something that I really value, and hopefully digital's not all evil. Hopefully it can at least help with things like that a little bit. How are we on time? I want to make sure we're
Good. It's a few minutes after 2, so
Okay.
we can
so. All right.
yeah,
So
keep
because
going
time.
if you'd like.
So
Yeah.
since I know that not everybody's read the artist statements, but I was lucky enough to read all the artist statements, and I think that every single one of you put the word time in your artist statement, and it was different. Some people allude to capturing a specific time. Some of you talk about slowing down time, speeding up time, capturing a time that has passed. Photography obviously is the medium where you, on a very basic level, are catching an instant in time, but clearly you all spend a lot of time, I think, thinking about time in a conceptual way. Does anyone want to take that existential thought on?
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys seen that documentary, the BBC documentary, The Genius of Photography. Yes. So there's this, I just remember Joel Meyerowitz like holding his camera and saying there's every camera has a timer. Every camera has a timer. So it's like when you hear the shutter, you're always capturing time based on your shutter speed. And I just think that's such an interesting thing to think about, is what your shutter speed is and time, and I don't know, just that concept is, I just thought about that a lot, how every camera has a timer. Yeah. Except pinholes, but they do too.
Yeah,
They do too, because it's the amount of time, how long did you expose the photosensitive material within the all cameras are timers basically.
Yeah.
I'd like to say something about that. Time has always been, it's always been near driving me crazy. And I think it may have driven me there at one point. When digital first came out, I was experimenting with a camera. This is probably 2000. Well, I was working with digital before that, and I had an idea, an epiphany perhaps, when I was taking pictures, experimenting with the camera, that first of all, it was immediate instead of me going to develop and look at it. And I came up with this idea of my adventures in time and space, in which I do 7 images that capture a narrative. And I've been practicing that since 2000, still do. But I think that speaks to time. My adventures in time and space. And that's,
You're going to catch a lot of Doctor Who fans.
The TARDIS is just going.
It's bigger.
Yes. Anybody else want to talk about time?
I'm happy to talk about time. And then one of the things I love about photography is light, but the other thing is time. Because as probably everybody who's ever thought about photography at all is aware of, is that you can capture this moment in time. And what's fascinating to me is that you can see so many things you can't see with that fraction of a second. Not only can you see things that are moving, and you see, like in one of these images, like little flakes of things that are burning and flying through the air that maybe you wouldn't be aware of when you're right there because you're maybe looking at other things, but it also allows you to have that image that you can go back to later. So it preserves memories as well, so you can go back and think about past time. But that moment in time that we might not be able to really focus on or see when we're looking at things. And I also love really long exposures, so the idea of capturing something that we can't even really envision with like something that's moving and blurred, and I love that the capability of the camera to do that as well.
That actually is one aspect of what I've been doing that's actually very satisfying, because I'm actually dealing with the exposure in 2 separate elements, but it's the one exposure. So I'm first calibrating an ambient exposure and then introducing an element of flash in the midst of that long ambient exposure. So I'm balancing one, deciding on its appearance, and then the final process is doing it again, but then introducing the extra flash to separate the 2 exposures. So to me, it's, because photography is always like this magical thing inside of a dark box. So when stuff like that happens, it's the same kind of excitement when I actually grasped the concept of the zone system. Now I've got control over the magic inside the little dark box. Mm-hmm. So I'm taking it out and I'm making it do what I want it to do.
In a different sense of time, not just the exposure time or capturing time, I find it interesting how many of us are dealing with like art historical time. It seems like with the wet collodion plates and the platinum prints, and mine's digital, but I'm thinking about art history, and a lot of you and yours as well. It seems like a lot of us are not trying to do hyper modern digital photographs. It seems like a lot of us are kind of interested in reflecting on art history too.
And I think that was kind of at least for me, it was a goal. I wanted to show people that there's good photography that's still being done with all historical processes, some that are hybrid, some that are not merely, I shouldn't say that because I'm one of them. Some practitioners that it's all digital, and show that there's
Go with pure digital.
Yeah, pure. Yeah, okay. We'll call pure digital. Pure digital. So that it actually shows that no matter what the medium, I think anyway, the art that I always like the best, there is a glance towards history and what's occurred before that person decided to create whatever that is. Because it's just, it adds a whole nother, so many more layers of interest to it that it happened. So you got to acknowledge it.
So one other element of time that photos capture, and this is, intentionally, typically a photo will capture a moment in time or a long period in time if it's a long exposure. But sometimes you capture sort of serendipity, and that's always interesting. Sometimes the serendipity is frustrating, and sometimes it's wonderful, or in between. And when after I'd scanned the negatives of the eclipse photos, I was going through and spotting them, because that's one of the reasons I had to scan them, because there were a lot of dust spots on the negative. And I discovered that there's 2 aircraft in one of the frames.
Yeah.
And one of them is visible to somebody who looks closely, and the other one is actually so faint that you can only see it on the negative, didn't show up in the print. But I wasn't timing for aircrafts, I was actually timing for a little boat that was in the foreground. I was waiting for it to be in a good spot. But by sheer luck, I got these 2 aircraft, and happily they weren't like in the gutter or halfway into the gutter, which would have been not good. But so sometimes in photography you get those surprise elements, which are also another capture of time. And I'd like to say that there's actually probably more people in my photo, because there's 2 aircraft.
One thing that I've always loved about photography, related to time and everything, is how we associate photographs with memory as well. So, and some of the research I did for this project about memory is that every time you recall a memory, it's actually your brain recalling the last time you recalled that memory.
Right.
So it's kind of like a corrupt digital file almost. And it's just weird how, you have this captured moment on a photograph, and you think, well, do I actually remember that event, or am I remembering how this photograph is telling us what this event was and how it looked? And yeah, I was there because I'm in this photo, but was I really, it's this inception weird thing. So, and also how that sort of ties to our notion of nostalgia too, which that word gets a little cliche and tossed around a lot, I think, but it's sort of important to think about as well. So,
It's interesting with portraiture too. I teach history of photography, and when we do the portraiture section, I tell people, you can't even imagine what it was like before portraiture. And I tell them to think of somebody who's passed away or that they don't see anymore. Like picture that person in your mind, and inevitably when they do, it's a photograph. And so what if you didn't have that photograph? I don't even know what that would be like, to try to remember somebody that I don't have any reference material for, and it's just such a different world now, because you've got images of your grandparents as children.
And not to get, sorry.
I was just going to say, it's like trying to think without language.
I don't know about that.
What were you going to say?
And I was just saying, not to get like all dark and morbid, but I just love postmortem photography.
Oh gosh,
that's a whole other thing. But
Yeah.
it's like, but you have this one
Yeah.
image of this loved one, and maybe they, are deceased, but it's like the one
You wanna
memory
remember
you
that.
have
Yeah.
of that loved one.
Yeah. It seems dark, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
If you know who Minor White was,
Yeah.
he did when he found out he was dying. Him and his assistant created this book. It was called Lives I've Never Lived. And Minor White would dress up as, a lawyer, a doctor, a poet, all these different things, and his assistant would photograph him. And then the last one was him laying in his casket. On the last page of the book.
We're getting a little more.
But I wonder though, if it's post-mortem, do you have to get a release?
Let's get a new question.
I really like the morbid stuff.
Just let this go.
But I do think though that kind of goes back to the changing role of photography in our lives. I mean, I think we all, again, many of us sort of saw that change between not just sort of when we had photography, but physical photography versus I have 1,000 photographs on my phone. I don't have a single one of them printed out. And we have boxes of photography that were in our families' homes, and my older Southern relatives were the ones that would snap that picture at a funeral, and it was because of them retaining that of that being the one image that maybe you had of someone.
That's a tradition in the South.
Yeah, and it is just a different that the conversation of what photography is changing so fast and all the time, and you do find yourself explaining things. But to make it a little less morbid, but to you guys gave me a good segue. I think I guess one of the questions we always get when we have any artist lecture is, what is something or someone who really influenced you? It can be art history, it can be a painter, it can be another photographer, it can be an event or something like that. Does anyone want to talk about some outside thing that was a huge influence on your work?
I have actually, I'll talk fast, but there's two. Okay, this is completely abnormal for me, but I gotta say, my brother Dave. But no, this is very, very key. He was actually working on a bachelor's degree, and he'd bring home these photographs that were, unless you know what's going on, of nothing.
That's me.
They were like shadows and light and part of a hand, and that that triggered something in my head, because I had always old family pictures. Always the most interesting parts of the pictures was all the weird stuff that was going on the outside edges, or that weird branch coming off the apple tree and the shadow it created in the background, and that had a massive, huge effect on me. And as a matter of fact, when you look at the three at the end, you can see that massive, huge effect. The other one was when I was in college, I was asked to kind of tutor a beginning student, kind of help them through. And at first I was highly annoyed by it, because she was total opposite of me, and so it was a challenge for me at that time. Lived in a sorority, was typical suburban Chicago in Iowa City, and the one thing she did, our next little tutoring session, she said, you have to take your camera and you have to go over to McBride Hall at the University of Iowa. That's where they have the bird hall and the mammal hall. That's over 30 years ago. That's what started. That's what started that. And at the time, what she wanted me to see was this diorama that was partially done of these sea lions and walruses covered with plastic, because they were just starting to paint the background. So there they were in this diorama covered with plastic, and it was just incredible. It was amazing. And so that's actually what started that whole process, because when I look back at everything I've done for the last 18 years, there's a thread that goes always back to the taxidermied animal, the painted scene behind the taxidermied animal, and all just kept on snowballing. So it was the appreciation for anomaly in a photograph that I got from my brother, because he would do entire photographs of anomaly. And as you can see, he still does. And then that one weird incident of somebody totally opposite of me that had the influence of, you've got to go there. And so that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Or at least the two main ones.
I have two quick ones. I mentioned my grandfather, and I think just having the coolest person I knew at the time tell me that photos were important and personal and intimate and had to be, that stuck with me. And then a friend of mine who's a contemporary photographer, Ted Kincaid, used to say, when you think you've got the good picture, move around it some more. Because inevitably, that was the best advice I've ever gotten. Inevitably, I'll take a picture and I'll think, that's good. But then keep playing, like move around the image and really exhaust it. And you'll get more, so just like shoot more.
So I have a lot that, when I was younger, I just absorbed everything. But one that stuck with me is a photographer called Mike Des Farmer. I don't know if
we have a bunch of his works in the Art Center's collection.
Oh, really?
Yes, they're amazing.
I got this book when I was in college, and I still, every time I look at that book, it's just so simple. And you realize there's all these portrait photographers, you know, they went, or they must have read the same how-to book, and it's somebody doing, you know, basically using the same equipment, but just keeping it simple and, yeah.
He had his own twisted view of.
Yeah, there, yeah.
Yeah, he was an eccentric, but yeah, we were very lucky to receive a gift of several
Wow.
of his works at the Art Center, and it actually, one of the great things about that gift is more photographers we have, when I asked this question to
Right.
photographers that come into the museum, they all bring up Mike Disfarmer, and actually the photographer Laurel Nakadate asked us to arrange a little case of his works for her show. They're very fragile old objects from the 30s and 50s, so we can't have them out all the time, but I fight for them to come out
Also,
whenever they
they're
can.
his prints, huh?
Some of them are vintage, yeah, I mean,
Oh,
they're
wow.
some of the old vintage card prints, yeah.
To see that, yeah.
So yeah, sometimes luckily we have a lot, but they're very fragile, so.
Yeah.
I took my first photo class when I was 16, and my first love was Dia Narvis. I think a lot of people love her work, but I just felt that she saw the world as an outsider, and I sort of have always felt like an outsider, like I don't fit in anywhere. So I feel like she saw the world, and maybe, I mean, it's insanely talented. I'll never be that talented, but I felt like she saw things the way I did, maybe there's some similarities. And then, of course, my father being a psychiatrist, I guess I grew up in a very small town, and so just always knowing that there was a lot beneath the surface, like seeing him say hi to people around town and thinking, oh, there's a lot going on there that I don't know about. Just always being aware that each person has a story to tell.
So my grandfather definitely was a huge influence. He was a somewhat well-known artist, painter. Any college football fans are probably familiar with what's probably his most famous piece, which is colloquial known as Touchdown Jesus at Notre Dame
Oh, yeah.
University. He did that, but he's actually one of the founders of the California School of Watercolor. So, and he was he gave me the delusion that artists make money because he was successful. But so I've learned to unlearn that early lesson. But I think I mentioned earlier on jokingly about my aesthetic, and but I definitely got an aesthetic from him and a feeling of what I want my art to be. And then my mother, who was unknown, but was also a painter, and so having those heavy influences were huge for me, and really have impacted the work that I want to show and what I think of as work that's worthy of being shown.
Artists that have influenced me a great deal: Alfred Stieglitz, Jim Cunningham, Walker Evans, the artists, most assuredly, actual people that have helped me and taught me and mentored me: Peter Feldstein, Mr. Who.
I was really lucky that I grew up in a family that appreciated art, so I really am very thankful for that experience. And as I started to just explore photography on my own, they encouraged me to think that photography could be an equal art form. Because back in 1960, early 70s, that was a real question in some circles.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I was really feel very fortunate that it was never looked down upon. And then when I did end up going to graduate school, I had a teacher who I learned a lot from, but especially, he taught the importance of drawing, which is still important to me, but he always said drawing is a way of thinking. And to me, I kind of have taken that on, and what I do to just look at all of art as being a way of thinking. There should be, for me, I get the most satisfaction when there's a concept behind it, and I have an idea that I'm working through, trying to put out there.
If we go back to family, my mom for going to parks and exploring nature and wanting to take me to parks and that sort of thing. I come from a line of drivers, so my dad was a truck driver. I have an uncle bus driver, a grandfather bus driver. My last name's Carr, so I think that had an impact. So I like to move and I like to go out and see the world and go see nature, drive and hike and that sort of thing. As far as concert lighting, just like the atmosphere created in concerts with the way the light changes, and I guess in theater as well, that sort of thing. Light-based artists, your James Turrell, Anthony McCall, and then for photographers, Robert Frank definitely, like
Oh, yeah.
editing and shooting and sequencing is fascinating. Eugene Richards for just how he gets to know people and how he photographs in his compositions. Hiroshi Sugimoto because of the spiritual in his work. And Joel Sternfeld just for America and that sort of like amazing compositions and exploration.
I was also lucky enough to grow up in a really creative home. My mother is an incredible artist, and I feel like she did every art form under the sun except for photography, so I kind of went down that path, and she was always kind of my biggest fan and told me to do what I wanted to do, and that's what I did. As far as photographers, my number one favorite is Laura Latinsky. Her use of light is gorgeous and beautiful, and I love her really soft color palettes, which was hopefully an obvious influence. And just other still life photographers, Olivia Parker, and I mean there's so many to name, but yeah, and all of you guys.
Yeah.
So do you want to take audience questions?
I think we can take a couple.
Does anybody have any questions out there in the audience?
For the teachers, format or when you say it, when you talk about digital camera or digital photography, I mean, in the last 10 years, the size of an image has grown exponentially, and it's expected to grow even more. And you take an old digital photograph, and time will show that will not be able to be viewed by the format that it was originally made. So I wonder, when you say the demise, I think Instagram is just gonna. It is. A lot of people take pictures not realizing that if they really, really, really like that, they really probably should print it.
Print, yeah. Print.
And I think, I don't think people realize that. Yeah. So they're taking all these, and they have these hard drives full of pictures. Oh, those are going to be, well, Yeah, 10, 15 years from now, you probably won't be able when to view Instagram those. eventually goes belly up, then
Yeah.
those photos are gone and you won't have.
Yeah. I think that
Oh yeah.
digital is all zeros and ones.
Yep.
And that'll always be able to be translated into
Yeah.
something.
Depends
I mean,
on
as
where
long
the
as there's
story
still
is.
electricity.
Well, yeah.
We might have bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, I think printing is actually, because until it's printed, I think it's just a theory.
Mm.
You know what it's.
You don't really know
So
what
you
you
can't.
have.
It's nothing until it's printed, and then also not just printed, but printed with thought as to what you're printing it onto.
Yeah.
The type of paper, the size, and everything else.
Walgreens paper.
Yeah, rather than just taking your, emailing it and having some guy named Skippy in Las Vegas in the strip mall print it and send it back to you in a tube. It's worth it to actually investigate different types of paper, different types. I mean, it's.
I guess I will agree with you this time.
Whoa! Calm down!
I will use the Hubble telescope as an example. That information they get from there, again, zeros and ones, whatever. If you looked at it, it looks like nothing, and then it's somebody who interprets it that makes it look like Jupiter and colors and all of that we see, oh, this is outer space. It's somebody's interpretation of what is outer space that we see through the Hubble telescope.
So, going back to sort of an earlier theme and tying back into the digital, we talked about how digital has made everybody a photographer and democratized photography, and in many ways made it more accessible. But in an odd way, in some ways at least, I found it becomes less accessible. Early on, I loved that I could have, as a screensaver, just photos that I'd taken would pop up. But when you've got 100,000 plus in your archive, then what? There's 20,000 on my iPhone, more than 20,000 right now. I have issues. But what I found was that So we had up through the film era where that was the snapshots you took rather than digital. We have photo albums of our lives, and then they come to a screeching halt
Yeah.
because you don't print those anymore. So they're not accessible in the same way. And again, going back to the concept of books, there's nothing like being able to flip through and see pages of your life, and you don't have that anymore in the digital space.
Even worse, people are taking those photo albums and digitalizing them,
Yeah.
and then not necessarily taking care of the originals.
But you are starting to see services now, though, that are going back to printing. I think
Right.
people are sort of starting to realize
Yeah.
that. I've increasingly noticed, like, they'll print a book for you. They'll print, in Vegas, they'll print it on chocolate for you. They'll print photographs like from your phone right there on a chocolate bar for you. But I mean, I do think people are starting to notice that lack of physical media. And I think you'll see a whole new business boom of maybe trying to remedy that a little bit, and then we all just have to weed through our 20,000, or our 20,000 photos to find the 200 you want in a book. All that food and cat photos, I gotta get rid of all that.
This actually brings up an interesting point, though, because I remember back living in Iowa City, my little 2-room apartment, and I was in the kitchen getting rid of old prints and some negatives I didn't like. My brother Dave knocks on the door.
It's me.
And he comes in and he gives me a 5-minute lecture about never, ever, ever throwing away anything that I have created. Never, ever. I mean, it was in a physical form, and it was. But at the time, I didn't see the logic or the wisdom behind it. But I figured it out later on. But you know, it's so different storing it where you can't see it.
So he was right.
Yeah, he was right. Oh, you tricked me!
I've been keeping score.
Okay, well, thank you, all of you. Thank you, all the audience. I hope you all enjoyed it.